The first rain of October came early this year. It was the kind that doesn't announce itself, just quietly begins to fall, painting the world in silver. Remember standing at my kitchen window that morning, my hands wrapped around a chipped blue mug of coffee, watching the raindrops trace uneven lines down the glass. The smell of wet leaves drifted in from the yard, and the maple tree outside my window trembled as though it remembered something it couldn't quite say. When I saw him, Bob, stepping out of the house across the street, umbrella in one hand, a paper bag in the other, and that same confident stride I used to find so comforting, he was smiling. Not the polite smile he gave me at breakfast, but a real one, kind I hadn't seen in years. The umbrella tilted slightly, and I caught sight of her, Chloe Hart, the woman who lived 2 doors down. She was wearing one of those oversized beige sweaters, the kind that slides off one shoulder like an accident that wants to be noticed. She took the bag from him. Their hands lingered, just long enough, then they both laughed, softly, and I swear the sound reached me even through the rain. For a moment, I told myself it was nothing, neighbors share things. Maybe he was dropping off muffins. Or a package. Or a lie wrapped in a brown paper bag. I sipped my coffee, and it tasted bitter. When you've been married for nearly 50 years, you learn not to jump at shadows. Didn't call him out. I didn't storm into the rain, I just watched. Quietly. The way I always have. Bob came home 20 minutes later. His shoes left little wet prints across my clean kitchen floor. He didn't notice. He rarely does. Morning, Maggie, he said, setting his keys in the bowl by the door. There was a warmth in his voice that almost sounded rehearsed. Chloe's car wouldn't start again. Poor thing was running late for her yoga class, so I gave her a hand. Oh, I said softly, pretending to stir sugar into my already sweet coffee. You're very kind. He smiled that tired husband smile. Well, somebody's got to help her. She's alone over there. I nodded. Because that's what I do. I nod, but inside, something quiet and old inside me began to stir, the kind of ache that feels like it's been waiting years to wake up. That night, while he snored beside me, I lay awake listening to the rain tapping the windows. It sounded like someone knocking, slowly, insistently, reminding me of all the things I'd chosen not to see. His cologne was different. It used to be sandalwood mist, the one I'd bought him every Christmas, but that night, there was something sweeter in the air, something floral, lavender. Chloe wore lavender. I closed my eyes and told myself not to cry. Crying is what I used to do in my 30s, when disappointment still surprised me. Now, at 67, I've learned that silence is stronger. The next morning, I called my daughter, Emily. She answered with the sound of children in the background and a voice filled with hurry. Hey, Mom. Everything okay? Of course, I lied. I was just thinking of visiting you in Chicago sometime soon. Oh, that'd be great. You'd love the fall colors here. Dad coming too? There was a pause. A long one. He's been busy lately, I said, helping Chloe with her car. Emily chuckled. That sweet woman next door? Well, that's nice of him. Not many men his age still lend a hand. I murmured. Yes. He's generous that way. She didn't hear the weight in my voice, she never does. She's young, with her life rushing forward, school drop-offs, work meetings, a husband who still brings her coffee in bed. She can't imagine what betrayal looks like after 40 years of shared mornings. Later that week, Bob said he was going fishing with his old buddy, Gary. Overnight trip, he said, tossing his duffel in the truck. Don't wait up. I smiled, kissed his cheek, and watched him drive away. Then I did something I never thought I'd do. I followed him. I didn't tail him like in the movies. I'm too old for that kind of drama, but I knew Chloe's car. A little white SUV with a cracked taillight. When I saw it turn down County Road 9, right behind his truck, I didn't need proof. I already knew. Still, I drove a little farther, far enough to see them pull into the Maple Lodge Motel off the highway. Cheap. Discreet. The kind of place where the air smells of cigarette smoke and regret. Parked a block away and just sat there. My hands trembled around the steering wheel. The rain had started again, gentle but steady, and the windshield wipers whispered back and forth, like a heartbeat I couldn't slow down. In my head, I heard every promise Bob had ever made, every anniversary toast. Every time he'd called me my rock. And it all crumbled into the sound of that motel door closing behind him. When I finally drove home, the rain had stopped, the world smelled clean again, but I didn't that night. I washed my hands 3 times, as if I could scrub off the years of believing him. The soap smelled of lilac, the same scent I'd used on our wedding day. I sat at the kitchen table until sunrise, staring at the wedding photo on the wall. He was smiling, young and sure, his arm around me like I was something precious. I realized, maybe for the first time, that I still am. The next morning, I began my quiet routine of pretending. How women like me survive, through small, graceful performances. Good trip? I asked when he came back Sunday evening. He nodded, setting down his fishing pole. Caught a few bass. Gary snores like a chainsaw, though. He laughed, and I smiled back. There was a faint mark on his neck, not from a fishhook. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I just said, I made chicken pot pie. Your favorite. He kissed my cheek, oblivious, and went upstairs to shower. Watched him go, the man who had once promised me forever, and all I felt was a quiet clarity. Love can end, but dignity doesn't have to. That night, I took my notebook from the drawer. It was the same one where I used to write lesson plans and poetry years ago. Opened to a blank page and wrote one line, he thinks I don't know. But I always did. Then I closed it and smiled, because if Bob was going to betray me quietly, then I would let karma answer quietly, too. The next few weeks passed like a well-rehearsed play. He left at predictable times. I smiled when expected, and every night, I thought about what justice really means. It's not rage. It's not yelling, it's knowing something they don't, and waiting for the right moment to let the truth walk out on its own. One afternoon, I saw Chloe outside trimming her roses. She waved. All sunshine and innocence. Morning, Maggie. Hope Bob's feeling better. He mentioned a bad back? I smiled sweetly. Oh, yes. He's been getting plenty of stretching lately. She blinked, confused, maybe nervous. Her perfume floated over, that same lavender scent. For the first time, it didn't make me ache. It made me plan, because love might fade, but memory never does, and soon, Bob would have a memory he'd never forget. There's a certain kind of peace that comes after heartbreak, not the soft, healing kind people talk about, but the hollow calm that lives in the space where your tears used to be. It's where I was living, in that quiet space. A place between fury and forgiveness. Between memory and goodbye. It had been 3 weeks since the motel. 3 weeks since I'd seen Bob's truck parked outside room 12, the one with the broken neon sign that flickered like a heartbeat on life support. He still thought I didn't. No, he still smiled over morning coffee. He still kissed my cheek before his fishing trips. And I still made breakfast, eggs, toast, and a secret smile, because my silence was my weapon, and patience was my ally. On the surface, life in Cedar Brook went on like always. The neighborhood was still the same, manicured lawns, quiet driveways, the faint hum of leaf blowers on Saturday mornings, but inside me, something was shifting. Began to notice things I used to ignore. The way the mailman looked at me with quiet pity, the way Chloe's curtains fluttered every time Bob's truck passed by. It was like the whole town knew the truth and was politely pretending not to. Even Helen Duffy, my neighbor and oldest friend, seemed to sense it before I said a word. She stopped by one afternoon with her famous lemon pound cake. Thought you might want some company, she said, her kind blue eyes scanning my face. I know that look, Maggie. I wore it once myself. I forced a smile. What look is that? The one that comes before a woman decides she's done being fooled. I didn't answer, just sliced the cake into even pieces, the citrus scent filling the air like a reminder that sweetness can hide sharp edges. She patted my hand. You take your time, dear, but when you do something about it, make it worth remembering. I met her gaze and said softly, oh, I will. That night, I went to the bathroom cabinet and found it, a small bottle Bob kept hidden behind the shaving cream, something I'd never paid much attention to before. Lubricant, the label read. How poetic. Stood there, holding it under the yellow light, thinking about how this was the bridge between his lies and her laughter, the thing that made their betrayal possible. Smooth, easy, effortless. I set it down on the counter and exhaled. Revenge doesn't always arrive like thunder. Sometimes, it whispers, and sometimes, it smells faintly of mint. The next morning, I went shopping, just the usual errands, groceries, cleaning supplies, and one extra item. At the hardware store, I asked the young man behind the counter where they kept the industrial adhesive, the kind that doesn't wash off easily. He smiled politely, not asking questions, added it to my cart, along with some gardening gloves and potting soil. Appearances matter. At home, I moved slowly, deliberately. I cleaned the house. I baked cookies, and then, when Bob went to mow the lawn, I replaced the contents of that small bottle with something far less forgiving. My hands didn't tremble, didn't feel like a villain. I felt steady. It wasn't cruelty, it was closure. Later that evening, he came in sweaty and smiling, the smell of cut grass following him like a memory of better days. "Smells good in here," he said. "Cookies?" I nodded. "Chocolate chip. Your favorite." He kissed my cheek, a routine gesture, empty as air. Then he headed for the shower, stood at the sink, drying dishes, listening to the faint hum of him humming. It used to make me feel safe, now it made me feel powerful. That weekend, Chloe's car disappeared from her driveway again. I knew where they were going. They were creatures of habit. After all, the world spun on as usual, neighbors pruning their roses, children riding their bikes, and me, sitting on my porch with a cup of tea, waiting for karma to do its quiet work. They must have gone to the motel again. Imagine they laughed, as they always did, him bragging, her pretending to listen. Two people tangled up in selfishness, unaware that actions have a way of sticking. And when it happened, when the laughter turned to panic and the panic turned to pain, I imagine the silence was deafening. Of course, I wasn't there, I didn't need to be, but I heard the sirens that afternoon, faint, distant, echoing down the road like a confession. I didn't move from my chair. I just sipped my tea, the steam curling upward like forgiveness in disguise. The next morning, it was all over the neighborhood, whispers floating between mailboxes and fences. The story spread faster than wildfire. Apparently, someone had to call 911 from the Maple Lodge Motel. A couple found, in a compromising position, unable to separate. The fire department had to respond. It'd been stuck together, literally, and no names were given. But in a small town like Cedar Brook, you don't need names, you only need imagination, and everyone's led straight to the same door. My door. Bob came home that evening, pale and humiliated. He couldn't look me in the eye. He moved stiffly, muttering about an accident. "Super glue," he said quietly, "some prank gone wrong. You wouldn't understand." I set his dinner on the table, pot roast, slow cooked to perfection. "I understand more than you think," I said. He didn't eat much that night, neither did I, but I slept better than I had in months. Days passed. He started avoiding Chloe's house entirely. She moved out within the week. Rumor had it she'd gone to stay with her sister for a while. When I saw the moving truck outside her driveway, I walked over with a potted plant and a small smile. "New beginnings?" I asked. She hesitated, eyes darting to the ground. I guess so." Her voice cracked. She looked thinner, smaller somehow. There were faint bandages on her wrists. For a moment, I felt pity, but then I remembered the sound of her laughter that morning in the rain, and how easily she'd smiled while stealing what wasn't hers. "Take care of yourself, Chloe," I said softly. "Some things have a way of sticking with us." She blinked, confused, but I'd already turned away. That night, Bob tried to apologize, not directly, men like him rarely do, just hovered near me, offering small kindnesses, as if politeness could patch the holes his lies had made. "I've been thinking," he said finally, "maybe we should take a trip. Just us. Start fresh." I looked at him, really looked at him, his face, once handsome, now lined with guilt, his hands, rough from years of work and maybe from what he'd been through. "You think a trip fixes what's broken, Bob?" He sighed. "I don't know. I want things to be normal again." I smiled faintly. Normal's overrated. That night, as he slept, I stood by the window and looked out at the rain again. It was softer this time, almost kind. Thought about the life we'd built, the house, the memories, the years. And I realized I didn't need to hate him anymore. He'd already punished himself. Every glance in the mirror, every whisper from a neighbor, that was his sentence. Karma had done the heavy lifting. All I had to do was let it. I poured myself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and opened my notebook. Again, this time, I wrote. "He forgot who I was, but now, he'll never forget what I can do." And for the first time in months, I smiled, a real one, kind that starts slow and honest, like sunshine finding its way through rain. It's strange how fast a secret can spread in a small town. You whisper it once, and by morning it's echoing through every grocery aisle, every barber shop, every Sunday PEW. By the time the first frost dusted the lawns of Cedar Brook, everyone knew. Not every detail, of course, just enough to look at me differently, half pity, half admiration. The women at church offered me tighter hugs, the men tipped their hats a little slower, with a flicker of shame in their eyes. No one ever said the words out loud, but gossip doesn't need to speak. It hums quietly beneath every polite smile. Bob stopped going to the diner after that, stopped playing cards with his old buddies at the VFW. He'd sit on the porch for hours, pretending to read the paper, but I could tell the words never made it past his eyes. Some evenings, he'd glance toward Chloe's old house, now empty, windows dark, and sigh like a man who finally realized the cost of his own foolishness. I didn't comfort him, I didn't scold him either. Just lived side by side, like two ghosts haunting the same memory point. One morning, a letter arrived from Chicago. Emily. Her handwriting was the same as when she was a little girl, round, careful, full of heart. Mom, it began, Dad called me last night. He sounded broken. I don't know what happened between you two, but please, don't let this ruin everything. You've both been through too much. There was love in her words, but also distance. Children never really see their parents as people until it's too late. Folded the letter neatly and placed it in my drawer beside my notebook. Some truths are too heavy to mail back. Later that week, Helen Duffy invited me for tea. Her house smelled like cinnamon and comfort, and the kettle whistled like it had been waiting for us both. I hear Bob's been keeping to himself, she said gently. I smiled. That's one way to put it. She leaned closer. And you? How are you keeping? I thought for a moment. I feel lighter, I said finally. Like I finally stopped carrying something that wasn't mine. She nodded knowingly. That's what truth does, dear. It sets you down where you belong. That night, I decided to wash the bedsheets, not because they were dirty, but because they smelled like too many yesterdays. I tucked the fresh linen tight across the mattress. I caught my reflection in the window, white hair soft around my face, eyes older but clearer than I remembered. For the first time in years, I saw myself, not as someone's wife, or someone's mistake, but simply Maggie, and she looked peaceful. The next morning, I found Bob sitting in the kitchen, hands wrapped around a cold cup of coffee. He looked smaller somehow, his shoulders rounded inward. I'm selling the boat, he said quietly. I don't use it anymore. I nodded, waiting. I thought maybe we could use the money to fix up the house. You always wanted a new garden fence, right? He looked up at me with those tired eyes, the same eyes that once made me believe forever was real. I'm trying, Maggie, he said. I know I can't undo what I did, but I'm trying. I stirred my tea, the spoon clicking softly against porcelain. You should be trying for yourself, Bob, not for me. He didn't answer. Sometimes silence is the only apology that fits. That afternoon, I went into town for groceries. The air smelled of rain again, sharp, clean, like renewal. I in the produce aisle, people smiled politely, and for the first time, I didn't feel the need to look away. At the checkout, the cashier, a young woman named Tina, leaned closer and whispered, Mrs. Turner, my grandma said you're the strongest woman she knows. I blinked, surprised. Oh. Why's that? She shrugged shyly. She said you handled what happened with grace. It's rare around here. I smiled, not because I needed validation, but because maybe, just maybe, Grace had finally found me too. When I came home, Bob was gone. Just a note on the kitchen table. Maggie, I need some time away. I'm staying at Gary's for a while. Don't worry. I'll take care of the bills, Bob. I stared at the note for a long time, then I folded it once, set it beside my coffee mug and whispered to the empty house, take all the time you need. Because for the first time in half a century, I wasn't afraid of being alone. Over the next few weeks, I found joy in the smallest things. The sound of the wind chime outside, the smell of freshly baked bread, the way the morning sun painted gold on the kitchen tiles, planted new flowers, lavender, of all things. Funny how something that once smelled like betrayal could now smell like peace. Sometimes, life gives you back the very things that once broke you. Only softer this time, only yours. A month Later, Emily came to visit. She brought her kids, my grandsons, all noise and joy and innocence. Their laughter filled the house like sunlight through open windows. That evening, after they were asleep, Emily and I sat on the porch with mugs of cocoa. She looked at me carefully. "Yeah, Mom," she said, "I never asked, what really happened between you and Dad?" I smiled faintly. "He made a mistake." And karma gave him a reminder. Her eyes widened a little. "Karma?" "Yes," I said softly. "It tends to stick." She studied my face for a long time, and then she laughed, that beautiful, genuine laugh of hers. "God, you've gotten wiser, Mom." "No," I said. "Just quieter." After she left, I went back to my notebook. I flipped through the pages, small fragments of thoughts, memories, lessons. On the last page, I wrote, "Some stains don't wash away, but sometimes, they remind you how strong the fabric really is." Then I closed it, set it beside my empty teacup, and listened to the soft rustle of leaves outside. The rain had stopped, the air smelled clean, and somewhere in the distance, a new day was already waiting. The days after Emily's visit drifted by like pages turning in a slow book. Soft mornings, cool evenings, silence that didn't ache anymore, just hummed, steady and familiar. For the first time in years, I slept through the night, and no half-awake sighs. No empty bed creaking under the weight of thoughts, just the steady rhythm of my own breathing and the faraway sound of rain tapping on the roof. Didn't know peace could sound like that every morning. I brewed 1 cup of coffee, no longer 2.at first. It felt lonely, then it felt right, like setting the table for the person I'd finally learned to care for, myself. Started painting again, little watercolors of the backyard, the maple tree, the fence, the way light shimmered through leaves. I wasn't good at it, but the colors made sense in a way life sometimes didn't. Was on a Tuesday, gray skies, smell of wet pavement, that the letter came. The envelope was plain, but I recognized his handwriting instantly. Robert Turner. My hands didn't shake. I just stood by the window, staring at the neat blue ink, feeling a strange mix of curiosity and calm. I made tea before opening it. It felt like a moment that deserved a steady heart. "Maggie, I've been staying with Gary for a few weeks. He's a good friend, though I think he's tired of my company." I wanted to write instead of calling. "You always preferred words on paper. I can't sleep much. Every time I close my eyes, I see the look on your face that day, not anger. Just silence. It's worse than shouting." You always had a way of letting people feel their own mistakes. No, saying sorry won't change what happened, but I needed you to know that I think about it every single day. I never deserved you, Maggie. Take care of yourself, Bob." I read it once, then twice, not for the apology, but for the weight of what wasn't said. No mention of Chloe. No excuses. Just a man learning what regret feels like when there's no one left to save him from it. I folded the letter neatly and slipped it into my notebook, the same one that held all my small truths, not as a keepsake, but as a record that I'd survived something worth surviving. That afternoon, I baked a pavie blueberry, Bob's favorite old habit, maybe, but when it came out of the oven, I didn't feel sadness. The smell filled the house with something that wasn't nostalgia, it was ownership. This was my kitchen, my home, and I could bake whatever I pleased, for whomever I pleased, even if that person was just me. The next week, Helen came by again. She brought a bag of fresh apples and that same mischievous glint in her eyes, sat on the porch, peeling fruit and trading stories. "You seem lighter," she said, handing me a slice. I smiled. "I think I finally am." "Did something happen?" "A letter," I said simply, "from Bob." Helen nodded knowingly. "Closure comes in many shapes, dear. Sometimes it's ink and paper, sometimes it's silence." She was right. The silence between Bob and me had finally stopped being a wound. It had become a border, a line between what was and what would never be again. That evening, I took a walk to the lake. The air was crisp, the sky soft lavender with streaks of gold. Leaves rustled underfoot like whispers of the past. I sat on a bench overlooking the water, the same lake where Bob used to fish on Sundays. For a long while, I just watched the ripples. They say water remembers nothing, that it moves on, no matter what you pour into it. I envied that, but then again, maybe I was learning to do the same. 2 days later, Emily called. Her voice was brighter this time. "Mom, Dad sent me a letter too." "Oh?" I said, gently. "Yeah. He said he's selling the boat, donating to the shelter, and he's starting therapy. Can you believe that? I smiled faintly. That's good, honey. Everyone deserves to try again, even him. Mom, she said softly, you sound peaceful. I looked out the window at the setting sun. I said. Finally. That night, I sat at my desk and began a letter of my own. Bob, thank you for your letter. I'm glad you're getting help. Want you to know that I'm not angry anymore. Not at you, not at Chloe, not at the years we lost. Life has a way of balancing things. Sometimes too quietly to notice. Take care of yourself. Maggie, I didn't send it. I just placed it beside his, under the weight of a small porcelain bird that used to sit on our windowsill. Some words don't need to travel far to bring peace. Weeks passed, autumn deepened, the trees outside painted the world in amber and red. Spent my mornings on the porch, watching squirrels steal acorns, listening to the same wind that once carried my heartbreak, and I realized something simple. Peace doesn't arrive in grand moments. It tiptoes in quietly, when you've stopped waiting for it. One morning, I found a small package at my door, no return address. Inside, wrapped in brown paper, was a photo, the two of us from 30 years ago, standing on the dock. Arms around each other. On the back, Bob had written, I still remember the smell of the rain that day. For the first time in months, I cried not out of pain, but because I finally understood that forgiveness isn't weakness, it's freedom. That night, I placed the photo in a frame on my bedside table. Next to it, I set a lavender candle. My new favorite scent, the same smell that once symbolized betrayal now filled the room with peace. Funny how everything changes meaning once your heart learns how to heal. Whispered a quiet goodnight to the empty room, and as the candle flickered, I realized something beautiful. I wasn't waiting for anything anymore. The house was still, the air was clean, and inside that quiet, I could finally hear the sound of my own soul resting. The seasons changed almost without me noticing. The maple outside my window turned from green to fire, then to bare. Some mornings, I'd wake to the sound of geese flying south, their calls faint but steady, like a reminder that everything eventually finds its own direction. Winter was coming again, a quiet one, kind where frost paints lace on the window panes, and every creak of the floorboard sounds like a memory walking past. Used to dread winter. The stillness, the isolation, but now, I found comfort in the silence. Because silence doesn't lie. I started volunteering at the library downtown. It wasn't much, sorting books, helping kids find stories, chatting with the older folks who came just to escape their empty houses. There's something healing about touching old pages, about knowing that even the stories with pain in them end eventually. Little girl named Hannah used to visit every Thursday, big brown eyes, 2 missing teeth, laughter like a melody that refused to fade. She'd always ask me to read her favorite story, The Velveteen Rabbit. One afternoon, she asked, Mrs. Turner, do toys really become real when someone loves them enough? I smiled. Maybe everything does, Hannah. Even people. She giggled, but I meant it. Love, a real love, makes you visible to yourself again. At home, the house no longer felt empty. It felt full of echoes, the good kind, the kind that hum softly and remind you you've lived. Replaced the old wedding photo on the mantel with a watercolor I painted of the lake, not to erase Bob, but to reclaim the space as mine. Sometimes healing isn't about forgetting, it's about rearranging what remains. In January, I got a postcard from Florida, of all places. The handwriting was unmistakable. Maggie, the ocean helps. I'm learning to be alone, finally. Thank you for your silence, it taught me more than anger ever could, Bob. No return address. Just the ocean behind his words. I held it for a long time, then placed it under my lavender candle. Maybe he was finally learning too, what it meant to live without lying to yourself. One morning, I caught my reflection in the hallway mirror, noticing the silver in my hair, the soft lines that traced my face like rivers leading home. For years, I thought aging meant fading. Now I saw it differently. Aging is how the light finds new ways to rest on you. I whispered to my reflection. You're doing just fine, Maggie. And for the first time, I believed it. Helen came by again, she always did, with her usual chatter and endless cups of tea, that watching snow fall through her window, the world outside hushed and pure. You ever miss him? She asked quietly. I thought for a long moment. I miss who I thought he was, I said, but not who he turned out to be. She nodded, smiling sadly. That's fair. I laughed softly. It's funny, Helen. For years I thought love meant holding on, but maybe it's just learning when to let go gracefully. That night, I wrote in my journal, maybe the real revenge is peace, the kind that arrives after the storm, when you no longer care who caused the rain. And as the clock ticked softly in the background, I felt something shift inside me, a release I hadn't known I was still waiting for. In February, the town hosted its annual winter fair, hadn't gone in years, but Helen convinced me. The streets were strung with golden lights, the air smelled of roasted almonds and cinnamon, laughter everywhere, families, children, couples holding hands, stood near the carousel, watching the horses go round and round, their painted eyes bright with eternal motion. A man selling candles smiled at me, looking for anything in particular, ma'am? Something that smells like peace, I said without thinking. He laughed softly and handed me one labeled sea air and lavender. I bought it. When I lit it that night, it filled the room with a scent that felt like forgiveness. One Sunday, Emily called again. She sounded happy, truly happy. Her boys were doing well, her marriage steady, her life full. Mom, she said, I've been thinking you should visit us this spring. Stay a few weeks. The boys would love it. I smiled. Maybe I will. She hesitated, then said, you know, Dad's been calling sometimes. He sounds better. Different. I'm glad, I said honestly. Sometimes losing everything teaches you how to start over. That night, I went to bed early. The moonlight stretched across the room like silk. Somewhere outside, the wind shifted, soft, kind, carrying the faintest scent of the ocean. Thought about Bob, somewhere far away, and felt no bitterness, only a quiet gratitude. For the years that had taught me what love shouldn't feel like, and for the peace that showed me what it truly could. The next morning, I woke before dawn. The house was still dark, the world silent except for the whisper of wind against the window. I made a cup of tea and stood outside on the porch. The sky was pale gray, a promise of light hiding behind it, and as I stood there, the wind brushed gently across my face, cool, fleeting, familiar. It felt like the universe exhaling. For a moment, I closed my eyes and whispered into the stillness, I forgive you. Not for him, for me, because forgiveness isn't about the person who hurt you, it's about the person you're finally ready to become after. That morning, I wrote one last line in my journal, when the wind forgets your name, it's not loss, it's freedom. Then I closed the book, and somewhere in that silence, I swear I heard the soft sound of my heart, steady, calm, and completely mine. By March, the snow had melted into thin rivers running down the street, the air smelled of thawing earth and second chances. Always loved this part of spring, the in-between days, when everything still looks broken but life is already stirring underneath. It felt familiar, like me. The house was quieter now, but it didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt alive in its own slow rhythm, the ticking of the kitchen clock, the creak of the hallway floorboards, the hum of the old refrigerator that refused to quit. For years, I'd blamed the house for holding too many memories. Now I realized, it wasn't haunted. It was patient, waiting for me to come back to it. Started small. A new coat of pale blue paint in the living room. Fresh curtains that caught the sunlight just right, the smell of lemon oil on the old oak table. One morning, I dragged a dusty box down from the attic, labeled Robert's Things. Inside, a stack of fishing magazines, faded photos, and his old leather wallet, cracked at the edges. I sat on the floor for a long time, the sunlight streaming through the window, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger, just tenderness. For the life that had been, for the girl I'd once been inside it. Kept one photo, the two of us dancing at Emily's wedding, his hand at my waist, my eyes bright with trust, not because I missed him, but because that version of me deserved to be remembered. 2. That afternoon, Helen came over carrying a tray of sandwiches. She glanced around the newly painted room and smiled. Well, look at this place. It's like the walls can finally breathe again. That's the idea, I said. She sat down, sipping her tea. You know, Maggie, some people start over by moving to a new house, but I think it's braver to stay, to rebuild in the same space that broke you. I smiled. Maybe I just like the view. We both laughed, the kind of laughter that comes easy between old friends. One Saturday morning, I drove into town to the farmer's market. The air was full of life, vendors shouting prices, children chasing pigeons. Music playing from someone's speaker. I bought fresh tulips, warm bread, and honey from a local beekeeper named Sam Keller. He looked to be around my age, kind eyes, sun-worn hands, the sort of man who took time with words. "You're Mrs. Turner, right?" "The teacher," he asked as he weighed the honey jar. "I used to be," I said with a small smile. "My niece had you in high school. She said you made her love reading again." I laughed softly. "That's the best compliment a teacher can get." He nodded. "Well, then this one's on the house." I insisted on paying, of course, but the gesture stayed with me all afternoon. It had been a long time since kindness felt that simple. When I got home, I placed the tulips in a glass vase on the kitchen table, their stems bent slightly toward the light. "Alive." Reaching, I whispered to the room, "See? We're both still growing." I didn't expect an answer, but the warmth from the window felt like one. A week later, Emily called again. She sounded excited. "Mom, guess what? We found an old photo album in the attic, you and Dad from your first year in Oregon. You two looked like movie stars." I laughed. "Oh, don't exaggerate. I'm serious. You were wearing that blue dress, the one you said was your favorite." I paused for a moment, smiling at the memory. "Yes," I said quietly. "That was a good day." Emily hesitated. "You sound okay with it all now." "I am," I said truthfully. "You can't carry pain forever, sweetheart. At some point, you have to put it down and make room for peace." She was quiet for a moment. "You really are the strongest person I know, Mom." "Not strong," I said gently. "Just practiced." Later that night, I sat by the window watching rain drift down the glass. It sounded softer now, like an old friend visiting instead of a ghost returning. I made myself a cup of chamomile tea, added a drop of honey from Sam's jar, and smiled at the simple sweetness of it. Funny how healing doesn't arrive like a lightning bolt, it seeps in quietly, through warm tea and kind voices and a house learning to breathe again. Spring deepened. The garden came alive with color. I planted lavender by the porch steps, and every time I brushed past it, the scent lifted through the air, gentle, clean, forgiving. Helen joked that the yard looked like something out of a magazine, but for me, it wasn't about beauty. It was about claiming joy again, in color, in scent, in living. One evening, as the sun melted into gold, I heard footsteps on the porch. When I opened the door, I found a small envelope resting on the mat.no name, just a simple card inside. "Thank you for teaching me how to be quiet, RT." I smiled softly. Bob had always signed his initials like that. Neat, formal, and no address this time either. Set the card on the mantel beside the watercolor of the lake. It didn't feel like reopening a wound, it felt like closing a circle. That night, I lay in bed with the windows open. The air was cool and full of the scent of fresh rain. Somewhere in the distance, a train passed, that long, lonely sound that always made me think of life moving on, carrying everything forward whether you're ready or not. And for the first time, I didn't feel left behind. I turned off the lamp, and in the darkness, the house seemed to sigh a deep, contented sound, as if it too had finally learned how to rest. By May, the lavender had taken over my porch, soft violet blooms brushing against the railing, the scent spilling into the warm evening air. I never realized how much I loved that smell until now. Gentle but persistent, just like healing. It doesn't rush you. It waits for you to breathe it in. The town was in full bloom too. Everywhere I looked, life was humming. Farmers repainting their fences, children running through sprinklers, couples holding hands by the riverwalk. Sometimes, I'd sit on the park bench with a notebook in my lap, jotting down old memories that still clung to me, not to dwell on them, but to give them a home outside my head. Something you learn as you get older: you don't have to erase the past to move on. You just have to write it down and let it rest. One Sunday afternoon, Helen insisted I come with her to the community art fair. "I'm not taking no for an answer, Maggie," she said, waving her car keys. "You've been cooped up in that garden long enough." So I went. The park was filled with tents, music, and the smell of roasted almonds. Children painted their faces, teenagers sold lemonade, and a local band played soft country tunes under the oak trees. Didn't expect to see Sam Keller there. The beekeeper was standing behind a small wooden booth, jars of honey catching the sunlight like tiny amber lanterns. He noticed me immediately. "Well, if it isn't my favorite teacher turned gardener," he said with that easy grin. I laughed. "Careful, I might start grading your honey for grammar errors." He chuckled, handing me a sample spoon. "Then I'll make sure it uses proper punctuation." We stood there for a while, talking about nothing and everything: the weather, books, his late wife, my daughter's promotion. It was simple, unhurried conversation, the kind you don't realize you've missed until it's right in front of you. When I started to leave, he reached into a small box and handed me a candle. "Lavender and honey," he said. "Made it myself. Smells like calm." I thanked him, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. That night, I lit the candle in my kitchen. The soft flame flickered against the window, casting gold ripples on the glass. The scent filled the room, floral, sweet, alive. I thought about how strange life is, how it breaks you apart, and then hands you small, unexpected pieces to rebuild with. I whispered to the quiet room, maybe it was all supposed to happen this way. And for once, I believed it. A week later, Emily visited with her kids, my grandsons, Henry and Jack. They ran through the garden chasing butterflies, their laughter echoing through the house. Emily watched them with a smile. "Mom," she said softly, "you look peaceful. Happier than I've seen you in years." "I think I am," I said, brushing dirt from my hands. "Peace takes time, you know. It doesn't show up at the front door, you have to build it, plant it, water it." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Dad used to say you were the glue that held us all together." I smiled faintly. Funny choice of words. Emily blinked, not catching the deeper meaning, and I laughed to myself, quietly, kindly, not out of bitterness. Just understanding. That evening, after they left, I sat by the garden watching fireflies appear like slow sparks. The world felt soft again, forgiving. Sam stopped by with a small jar of lemon honey and 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might like company," he said. He sat on the porch steps, the air filled with lavender and the sound of crickets. "You ever think about starting over?" I asked him after a while, but he smiled. "Every time I plant a new hive, bees don't dwell on where the last flowers went. They just keep looking for the next bloom." "That's beautiful," I said. He shrugged. "Nature's got all the best metaphors." We talked until the stars came out, about books, places we'd been, things we still wanted to see. I realized then, healing doesn't mean closing your heart sometimes, it means opening it again, but softer this time. Later that night, when I came back inside, I passed the old photo of Bob and me on the shelf. For the first time, I didn't feel that pang of grief or anger, just gratitude, because without that chapter, I might never have found this peace, this lavender light that fills the house, this small kindness that keeps showing up at my door. I whispered a quiet thank you to the life that broke me, because it also taught me how to rebuild, and somewhere deep in the walls of this old house, I swear I could feel it breathe again, steady, gentle, alive. The first light of dawn crept softly through my curtains, a thin ribbon of gold stretching across the wooden floor. For a long moment, I just lay there, listening. The house made its usual sounds, the hum of the fridge, the ticking of the clock, the faint sigh of the wind slipping through the window crack. But this morning, it felt different. It felt alive. I pulled the quilt around my shoulders and sat up. My knees ached the way they always did, but I smiled anyway. Old bones have their own weather. They creak when storms are coming. They hum when peace settles in. This morning, they were humming. When I stepped onto the porch, the air was cool and damp, thick with the smell of wet earth and lavender. The mist lay low over the yard like a soft blanket, and I could hear the distant call of a mourning dove. For a second, I thought about how many mornings I'd wasted waiting for someone else to wake. Beside me, now, the quiet was mine, and it was enough. I cradled a mug of hot coffee in my hands, feeling the steam rise against my face. There's something sacred about that first sip. It tastes like presence, like being here, down the street. A few porch lights flickered on. The world was waking up in pieces. Remembered a line from an old poem I used to teach my students. "There is a crack in everything, that's how the light gets in." Back then, I understood it with my head. Now, I understood it with my life. When I turned to go back inside, I caught sight of the lake beyond the trees, its surface still and gray, just beginning to catch the morning glow. Bob and I used to come here at sunrise every summer, pretending it meant something more than it did. Thought about the last time we went together. He'd been distant, his phone buzzing in his pocket, and I'd looked at that water thinking, how many secrets can one reflection hold? Now, I looked again and realized, the lake hadn't changed, only I had. It no longer reminded me of loss, it reminded me of endurance. When I came inside, the phone was ringing. It was Emily. "Morning, Mom," she said, her voice still sleepy. "I know it's early, but I couldn't wait. I just wanted to tell you I got the job." I gasped, smiling wide. "Oh, sweetheart. The one in Portland?" "Yes," she said, laughing. "Full-time, benefits, everything. I start next month." I could hear the joy in her voice, and something else too, a kind of steadiness. It made my heart warm. "I'm so proud of you," I said softly. "You've worked so hard for this." There was a pause, then she said, "You're the reason I didn't give up, Mom. Watching you start over, it showed me that it's never too late." My throat tightened. "Life doesn't end just because one chapter closes," I whispered. "Sometimes it's just an invitation to write a better one." After we hung up, I stood there for a moment, the receiver still warm in my hand. Sunlight spilled through the window, turning the kitchen into gold. Dust danced in the light like tiny memories learning to let go. Poured myself another cup of coffee and smiled. Maybe this was the secret no one tells you about healing. It doesn't come all at once. It comes in pieces, a sunrise, a phone call, the quiet comfort of a life that no longer hurts to live. Later that afternoon, a small envelope slid through the mail slot. The handwriting was familiar, though shakier than I remembered. It was from Janet, Bob's sister. I sat by the kitchen window as I opened it, my fingers trembling just a little. "Dear Maggie, I know this might surprise you, but I wanted to reach out. Bob's been struggling. He talks about you sometimes, says you were the calm in his storms, even when he didn't deserve it. But you'd want to know that he's been trying to be better. I hope you've found peace, truly. You always deserved it, Janet." I read it twice, then I folded it neatly and set it beside my teacup. There was no anger this time, no ache, just release. People change, sometimes too late, sometimes just enough to say sorry in the language of regret, and that, too, is a kind of closure. That evening, Sam stopped by again. He carried a small jar of honey in one hand and a shy smile on his face. "Brought you something new," he said. "Lavender blend. Thought it might suit you." "It already does," I said, taking it gently. Sat on the porch, the sun low and soft behind the trees, the bees buzzed lazily around the garden, and the air smelled like warm soil and flowers. He leaned back, watching the sky fade from gold to lilac. "You ever think about how the world just keeps going?" he asked quietly. I nodded. "Every day." He smiled. "Guess we're lucky then, still here to watch it." After he left, I poured a spoonful of his honey into my tea. The taste was rich and fragrant, sweet but grounded. It reminded me of something real, something earned. As twilight settled, I lit the lavender candle and let its light fill the room. The walls glowed soft amber, and for the first time, I realized, the house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt whole. The next morning, I wrote Janet a short reply. "Dear Janet, thank you for your note. I wish your brother well. I've learned that forgiveness isn't about forgetting, it's about freeing yourself from the weight of what happened. Please tell him I hope he finds peace too. Maggie." I sealed it, placed it by the door, and watched the first rays of sunlight spill across the floor again. Same light, new day, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was surviving, I felt like I was living. The next morning arrived quiet and tender, the kind of morning that feels like it's tiptoeing into your life. The sky was soft rose and gold, the air heavy with dew. Stood on the porch, wrapped in my shawl, watching light pour through the branches like forgiveness spilling from heaven. Every breath felt clean, every sound, the chirp of robins, the rustle of leaves, felt like the earth saying, "You made it." For the first time in years, I didn't think about what I'd lost, I thought about what I'd learned. Later that day, I took a walk down to the lake, the same one where Bob and I used to sit in silence, each of us pretending we didn't already know the truth about each other. The air smelled of pine and morning rain, tiny ripples shimmered across the surface, and the sunlight danced over them like liquid gold. Found the old bench still standing under the willow tree, its paint had faded, the wood rough and weathered, much like me. I sat down slowly, running my fingers across the grain. "Hello, old friend," I whispered. For a while, I just listened to the soft lap of water, to the wind combing through the reeds, to the steady rhythm of my own heart. Peace doesn't arrive like a storm, it seeps in quietly. Until one day you realize the silence isn't empty anymore, it's full. I pulled a folded paper from my coat pocket, the reply I'd written to Janet. I hadn't mailed it yet. But maybe I didn't need to. I tore the edge gently and let a small piece fall into the water. It floated there for a moment before sinking, disappearing into ripples that carried it away. It's what forgiveness looks like, I thought, not grand gestures or second chances, just letting go of what no longer needs to stay. As I sat there, I remembered something Bob used to say when we first got married. He'd whisper it on mornings like this, when the light was soft and the world still half asleep. "Don't blink, Maggie. You'll miss the good part." I smiled sadly. He was right, there were good parts, real ones, before the lies began, and holding on to those good parts doesn't make me foolish. It makes me human. You can honor the love that was good and still walk away from the love that turned cruel. It's not weakness, it's wisdom. When I got home, Helen was waiting on the porch with a basket of muffins. "I figured you'd forget breakfast," she said. Smiling, I laughed. "You know me too well." She sat beside me, handing me one. "So, how are you really?" I took a bite, savoring the warmth of blueberry and cinnamon. "I'm good," I said softly. "Really good. I used to think peace was something you found out there, somewhere. But it's more like something you grow. Slowly. From the inside out." Helen nodded. "I always knew you'd come out of this shining." I smiled. "Not shining. Just steady." We sat together for a while, watching bees hover around the lavender, their wings catching the light like tiny stained glass windows. The world was ordinary again, and that, I realized, was the miracle. That evening, Sam stopped by with 2 cups of coffee. The sun was setting behind him, painting the sky in streaks of orange and violet. He handed me a cup and sat down beside me on the porch swing. The wood creaked under our weight, a sound that somehow felt like comfort. "I went to the lake today," I said after a while. "Yeah?" he asked, sipping his coffee. "How'd it feel?" "Like I could breathe again." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes the hardest forgiveness is the one you give yourself." I looked at him, at his kind, weathered face, his eyes that seemed to hold both laughter and sorrow in equal measure. "I think I finally did," I whispered. He reached out and covered my hand with his, sat like that as the sun disappeared, the first stars waking up overhead. Later that night, I stood by the window with a candle in my hand, the same honey lavender one he'd given me months ago. Its flame flickered, steady and warm. Thought about everything that had led me here, the betrayal, the heartbreak, the quiet revenge that set things in motion, and all the small choices afterward that built something stronger out of the ashes. Some people think peace comes when you fix what's broken, but I've learned peace comes when you stop needing to fix it at all. The next morning, I woke early, earlier than usual. The air outside was cold enough to make my breath visible, little clouds floating away like thoughts I didn't need to keep. Stepped onto the porch just as the sun began to rise. It painted the horizon in pinks and golds, and everything, the grass, the lavender, the old mailbox, seemed to shimmer under its light. I closed my eyes, breathed in deeply, and whispered, "Thank you." For what exactly, I wasn't sure. Maybe for the pain that became strength, maybe for the silence that became peace, maybe just for the chance to see another sunrise. Maggie's story touched your heart today. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Dizzy here, every story is a reminder that even after heartbreak you can bloom again. Cherry Blossom.